Morning, Harefield. Now, all my life, I've been quite interested in cars. At school, I used to draw cars whenever there was a quiet moment in a lesson. I wanted to be a car designer until I realised I didn't have the talent or really the obsession enough. I read a lot about cars, and as a teen, I used to go around car dealers and pick up lots of sales brochures. I had tons of them. 20 years later, they sold quite well on eBay though. I've never been any good at actually fixing cars, mind, or anything useful, but I knew a lot about them. I know a lot about them. Do you want to see some snaps of the cars I've owned? They're nothing flash. I've never really had the money to get interested in cars, but this is my thought of the day, so I'm going to show you whether you want to or not. So the first car I ever owned was this Datsun Cherry. It was my granddad's car. He unfortunately died as I was learning to drive, so I inherited it, and it taught me an awful lot about rust and about fixing exhausts. So when that died, my dad bought me this little Daihatsu Charade, 3-cylinder engine, 1 litre, but it had 5 gears and wing mirrors that tended to turn inwards anything over 60 miles an hour. That was handy. The first car I actually spent my own money on is still my favourite. This little thing is a Lancia Y10. It had 1.05 litres of turbocharged engine, and it had classic Italian unreliability. It had already had an engine rebuilt and a new dashboard of all things before I got it, but the fog lights used to come on over 3,000 revs. The dashboard always reckoned that the brakes weren't working. There were lots of other warning lights that used to flash on and off randomly. The driver's window used to fall into the door regularly, and I had to call the AA out twice in the same day once. But hey, it did look quite good. So when that died, I had to drive the family's second car for a little while. This is a little Cinquecento. It was so slow, but it was actually great fun to drive around the lanes to work every day. I then bought what's my fastest car. This is a Fiat Uno Turbo. Can see a trend here yet. This was quick, but it had 2 cracked pistons, so it didn't actually last very long. I sold it to a guy who flew over from Ireland and drove it back because he had a spare Fiat Uno Turbo engine sitting in his garage, he reckoned. He, as I say, he flew over, he paid me 150 quid plus a bottle of whiskey. I never did drink the whiskey, and I also never heard if he made it back to Ireland. So next was this cheap Citroen AX GT5, not the normal 3-door, this was the lesser spotted 5-door model, as I thought it was less likely to have been kevved. Instead, I modified it myself by driving it into a scooter one day. He was fine, but I had to replace the bonnet with one from a scrapyard, so from then on it was a grey car with a blue bonnet. And I ended up eBaying the car for 60 quid when the heater matrix died. Now by this time I was married, so thankfully my wife had a reliable Citroen Saxo, and then we had to get a family car. So Mondeo wasn't quick, but it was surprisingly nice to drive actually. And for fun, I was then allowed to buy this little Skoda Fabia VRS, which is probably the best car I've ever had. It was quite sad to sell this one. When the Mondeo died, I was able to get this Skoda Octavia VRS, and 3 months later, we found we were expecting Jessica. And we knew we couldn't get 3 car seats along the back of the Octavia, so we now have this boring Zavira instead. Hey ho. So, cars have always been a big thing in my life. They've taken up a lot of thinking time, a lot of reading time. And one day, I can't remember when it was, but I stumbled across a verse in the Bible that probably means nothing to you, but it did make me think. Psalm 33 verse 17 says, "A horse is a vain hope for deliverance. Despite all its great strength, it cannot save." Now I know that's not directly about cars, but this verse really spoke to me Because what's the modern version of a horse? A car. So, say it again, a car is a vain hope for deliverance. Despite all its great strength, it cannot save. Now, I'm sure horses weren't just transport in the first century, they were status symbols too. I'm sure young men would have tried to ride thoroughbred horses that would gallop faster than others. And horses would have been a powerful image. They're big investments for people. And yet what does the psalmist say? For all their great power, they can't save. And it is obvious, but a car, even a powerful car like a Ferrari, cannot save you. When your life's complete and you're standing in front of God, your Lamborghini is not going to seem very important, and it certainly won't sway God to let you into heaven. The only thing that will is knowing his son, Jesus of Nazareth. So, sorry I probably bored you today, unless cars is your thing. But today's thought is, what's the biggest thing in your life? What takes up your time, your thinking, your actions? Even if it's the most worthy cause, it is still a vain hope for your deliverance compared to the God who saves.